Oh, I am just waiting for Facebook to load. You'll have to bear with me, everybody. I will be. Ah, hello, everybody. I believe I am now live on both King's Head. What do you call it? Social media platforms, whatever you call them. How is everybody? I see a Chris Sherwood has just joined. How lovely to see a friendly face. And a Paul Nicholas Dyke as well. Hello, 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 hello. Right. Well, I'd better start going. Has anyone got any questions to begin with? What would you like me to say? I'll tell you what. I will begin because some of you would have tuned in wondering who on earth is this strange, mousy-looking chap. My name is Andrew Keates. I'm a theatre director. Um, I suppose everything started many, many years ago when I had the honour of co-running the Landor Theatre with Robert McQuirr, which we ran, or I was part of for 3 years. He was with it a lot longer. And my mission there was to present new musicals and exciting new plays and rediscoveries. And I suppose from there went on to form Arian Productions, of which I'm the current artistic director, with a commitment to presenting pieces of the highest artistic quality, but with a real focus on presenting pieces that give people from a social or an ethnic minority background a real chance. We also create lots of events and opportunities and resources for theatre makers, including a thing called the Show People podcast, which I host, which is a podcast that really tries to sort of shine a spotlight, as it were, on the UK performing arts industry and those dedicated to their craft. So what we do is every sort of fortnight I interview the great and the good, whether that be Olivier Award winners to casting directors, and what we do is we chat about their life and career. As I've found that a lot of these podcasters tend to talk about the great and the good rather than the struggle that we all have. So that's what I do. So hello everybody. Who has anyone got a question? How do I find out if somebody's got a question? I suppose that's the most important. Here we go. Questions from your viewers will be shown here. Great. Well, I can do that on Instagram. As someone who is just starting out in directing, what is the first element you think about when you read a script? Good question. What is the first element? The very first thing, the first thing that always hits me is rhythm, which might sound unusual to some people. I find that particularly with new writing or new writers, I have a real problem when all the characters sound exactly the same. So what I quite like to do is, as a little experiment within the first pages, is just really feel the rhythm of each character and how that sort of symphony of language will come together. So first of all, I look for rhythm. My second thing I look for is unnecessary exposition. I find exposition is a nightmare, but I tend to look at how exposition is and whether that's clunky. And that's the first things. But the final thing, which is probably the most important thing, is it a really good story? Whether that be musical theatre, whether that be a straight play, whether that be an operetta, whatever it is it a great story, and is it relevant to now? There are lots of great plays, but I think sometimes people just put plays on because they're great rather than perhaps listening to the rest of the universe and the world around us and finding a way to tell a story that might make us think about issues that are important for that day. So that is the answer to your question. Another question here, which is, bear with me. Do you have tips on pitching to producers and starting those kinds of relationships? Good question. Do I have tips? I think, in my experience, the thing I really, really hate, is false networking. So and it does happen. I'll be out, say, on a Saturday night, say, with some mates having a few beers down the pub, and an actor or writer sort of edges up and is sort of they want to talk about work, and I find that sometimes inappropriate. because we all have social lives, and this is my absolute life. I adore it. But if I'm out with my mates, I don't really want necessarily to be pitched at, when I've had, a couple of beers and whatever. First of all, I think the producer-director relationship is probably one of the most vital um, in creating a production, certainly when you're making it. So I think it's about finding a producer that has the same integrity as you. um, if you're starting out, quite often I think the director and producer quite often becomes one and the same thing. Um, but as you start finding producers on your merry way, it's just about making sure that you remember as a director, you know, it's easy to get swept up with. It's very easy to get swept up with the producing side of things rather than the mining the text, finding a story, perhaps potentially attaching other production team members slash creatives to it, and lastly, any actors, any particular actors that you've got in mind, and sort of putting together that and pitching it to a producer in a professional manner. I think we think um, approaching producers and directors to get our work. Quite often, it's something we're quite bad at. I think because we're not very good as Brits, certainly. Producing producing these networking opportunities, and they're all very very false. When you meet a producer that is on your wavelength, it'll feel right. It'll feel right. Any other questions? Well, thanks for joining me. I'll go and drink my tea. What do I think about opera? Good question. Do you know what? I do listen to some opera. I think it's tricky for me as I don't really speak any foreign languages, and my joy is always in language and text. And It's tricky. I enjoy listening to opera. A bit of Puccini, for example, whilst I'm making the mashed potato in the kitchen. But it isn't the thing that really. It's not something that really excites me. Loads of people say they love opera when like me, they've got an opera playlist on Spotify and they listen to it. It's an art form I haven't personally invested in, and I'm sure later in my life I probably will do. But to be honest with you, I tend to do musicals that have a very very strong book, and or plays that tends to be my thing. So I apologise. I'm not going to be very good at answering questions about opera. Any tips on finding assisting opportunities? Ah, my tip is don't. Honestly, the question was any tips on finding assisting opportunities. I never really did it. I'm of a mindset that you just make shit happen. Sorry for swearing any, but I do, so you'll just have to cope with it. All of the best swear words I learned from children. I never really did the assisting route. I spent 6 years at drama school, so perhaps that was the closest thing I found to it. But all the plays I wanted to do, I just made them happen. Whether that be Bent by Martin Sherman, which was probably the play that sort of put me on the map when I was 22, 21. I'm now 34 now. Just beg, borrowing, stealing anything you can. At that time, it was very much a time of profit share, a shame it wasn't loss share at the time. I'll tell you that for nothing. But we just had this amazing can-do attitude. We just found the great plays that we wanted to do, and we made them. There were some fantastic books that I read. There were great directors I worked with at drama school. So yeah, I just made things happen. Assisting, just write to directors, but 9 times out of 10, the big directors, they've already got their own assistants, and they tend to use them time and time and time and time again. Question from Ben Papworth, my friend Ben Papworth. What is your advice for someone wanting to start producing but doesn't have access to much upfront funding? The Arts Council, it is a minefield. It is an absolute minefield when it comes to raising money. That tends to be the one thing that I ask creative people to be creative about. In that, we talk about how creative we are as human beings, but we don't apply the same creativity when it comes to raising funds. So what we really want is we just want a producer to raise the money so we can have the fun. But actually, that if you haven't got a producer, then how can you be creative? Can you do like I'm doing now? Can you do a live stream class, for example? Can you do the most obvious thing is crowdfunding, for example. Can you come up with unique perks? When I did Dark Sublime with Marina Sirtis in the West End, because she was involved in Star Trek, she had a fan base. So as part of the funding, we offered dinner with Marina after the show. And that raised a lot of money. We came up with posters and badges and key rings and having your name in the program. So we applied our creativity to raising the money just as much as we did when it came to putting on the show. Christopher Sherwood, hello. Do you think the theatre community overemphasises its role as an agent for social and cultural change compared to, for example, continuing drama circuits on TV, which have a far higher reach? No, Christopher, I don't. I don't think it. I don't think it does, because I think the quality of what we achieve versus the mass numbers we reach is different. And this comes down to something I do when I do a lot of tutorials with young directors. I often ask, when did you first discover theatre? And 9 times out of 10, I'm told I discovered theatre through the Pantos, or I saw Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And I always say that I think people first discover theatre when they're a baby, and you've got a relative or a guardian or someone who's caring for you as a baby, and they have that game of peekaboo, and they probably disappear behind the breakfast bar or the sofa. And you get that thing of, as a kid, they disappear, and you're like, what? Where did you go? And then, they hide again, and then go peekaboo, and joy and elation follows. I think by being in an actual auditorium, seeing something happening in front of you is something so visceral, and goes back to such early man of presenting a story, but not presenting, but being in the room and feeling it. That sense of the ensemble, that sense of being within a shared experience. I find that will impact me and stay with me longer and more profoundly than, say, an ITV drama, which will have moments, which of course will be great, because as creatures of the theatre we have empathy. But no, that is why I think there is a more profound sense when it comes to being in the theatre, that shared experience, that coming together, and that early peekaboo thing of knowing that what is in front of you is actually happening in front of you. What do I think? What do you think are the biggest pitfalls that aspiring directors can fall into, both practically and creatively, and how to avoid them? God, well, I'm probably the example of all of those things. The biggest pitfalls directors can make, I think, not reading enough and not knowing what's out there enough. There's a lot of young directors who'll get really, really excited about presenting a really, really overdone play. And I find that when someone is saying to me they're going to do a production of The Importance of Being Earnest, I just sort of, Oscar Wilde is one of my favourite playwrights, and I love that play. But come on, if you want to, what do you want to be defined as? Do you want to be defined as the guy or the girl or whatever, that does The Importance of Being Earnest? Probably not. So read new work. Don't just read the plays that you liked when you were at school, at drama school. Find that unique piece where you can be, where you can set the trend, especially when it comes to writing, which we just don't have enough of, in my opinion, in this country. So I think make sure you know what's out there. I think in working with too many mates can be a problem sometimes. I remember that. I quite like the fact that my professional creative team that I have around me is very different to the team that I go to the pub with. Because I think as a director, the most important thing is our ability to facilitate, and sometimes that means challenging the artists on your production team around you, and it can be quite difficult, if you haven't got a boundary between you and them to be able to say, the production deserves better than that, or I think you can come back with some better ideas for this. Um, if you're just with your mates, sometimes, depending on your sensitivity, sometimes you can let things slip because, oh, it's my mate, and I don't think that's helpful. I think the same is true of actors. I have a rule with all the actors in my life that are proper friends, as in mates that I see. My rule with them is I'll never give them a job, which sounds cruel, I know. But my reason for that is, if you want a job from me, come in an audition, and that's fine. But it can be tricky with the people that you keep in your life as a director. Um, it can be tricky because you also need that network of friends for when you're not a director, when you have had that breakup, or I've got issues with my family working on the NHS front line at the moment, and I've needed my friends to call, and and again, I quite like compartmentalizing things a little bit. There are my mates, and then there are the people that I work with. Now, there are people I work with that I love, don't get me wrong, and I would be there for them in a heartbeat if they needed me. But again, it's that barrier, because we should help. Have I missed any questions? I saw Christopher's. Would you be more drawn to opera if it were in English? Well, do you know what? There are some. I mean, I know the work of Britain, for example. Do you know what it is? I'm always happy to say that. Do you know what? This is the best lesson I'll give anybody, and this connects to this opera question. When I started out, the phrase that I wish I learned earlier is "I don't know," because as a director, we have this sort of oracle-like status. We're meant to know everything, and it isn't helpful, really. So yeah, I would say the question of "I don't know" is very useful. So, in regards to opera and whether it be in English, I just don't know enough about it to know whether I would love it, because I can't know everything. But I will absolutely do my very, very best to go out and listen to some more opera. In fact, I've just seen the wonderful Adam Spreby-Mayer's drawn. If anybody can recommend great operas, it's him. So perhaps Adam will be kind enough to send me some Spotify links and give me a job, because that would be very nice on the crusts of bread that I'm living on at the moment. What else have I got here? Any other questions? So I'm scrolling through Instagram. I'm not suddenly gone on Tinder or whatever that app's called. Any other questions from anybody as I grab a mouthful of tea? Do you know one thing I would say, just to try and because these things can, while somebody thinks of a question, please think of a question. I think with this, one thing I've learned over the past few weeks is what we as creative people need in our lives. What we tend to need is an idea, a process, and the satisfaction we get from achievement. And I think what's tricky with this lockdown, like I haven't really left the flat. This is my flat. I haven't really left my flat for nearly a month now, and I think it's important to remember that the creative process isn't just something that we fill in our lives from the rehearsal room. So, for example, if you're lucky at the moment to have some flour in your cupboard and some yeast and whatever, make a loaf of bread. But not only that, think about what kind of bread do I want to make? What can I use with whatever I've got available to me? Go through that beautiful process of making a loaf of bread, and then you get the satisfaction of eating it. And I mean, that's what I always try to give actors and people I'm working with in the rehearsal room on a play, which is, here's the text. Where's the process? Do I understand it? Have I found myself in the end? And I think to keep us all a little bit sane, because we haven't got a rehearsal room or we haven't got production meetings to be going to at the moment, I think finding those little creative processes. I'll show you something. I love learning new things. I'm really crafty with my hands and things. And because I didn't really have anything to do, one of the things I've been doing, and it's just next to my desk, I started building a DeLorean from Back to the Future, just because I was like, I don't know how to do this. It'll be a laugh. And lo and behold, I've learned how to airbrush and craft and mask and all sorts of stuff. So, teach yourself some new skills and find some things that are find yourself things that can have an achievement. Adam, tell me about how you got to do bent. Good question, Adam. How did I get to do bent? When I was 13 years old, when I was 13 years old, I came out to my mum that I was gay. Anybody watching this that is surprised by that, gosh, I'll be very surprised. I read a play called Bent, which is it was the greatest play I'd ever read. I used to keep things under my bed as a young gay teenage lad. And they weren't mucky magazines. They were the plays of Tennessee Williams, Oscar Wilde, Noel Coward, and Martin Sherman, Bill Hoffman, Larry Kramer. And I used to hide them because they were obviously gay plays. And the reason for that was there was nobody like me on television. The only time that gay people were on television, we were either, camp comics, or we were either limping our wrists or slitting them. That's what we were doing. And so I found, all of my heroes in plays and role models in plays, and the occasional TV show, but fundamentally in plays. And then I read this play Bent by this man, Martin Sherman. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, I woke my mum up with a cup of tea and a cigarette, because I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to tell her I'm gay, I might as well tell her I smoke. And I gave her a letter and I came out to her. So that play was very important. Years later, when I would leave the various drama schools I went to, I had this unstoppable energy. I just started, co-running the Landor with Robert McClure, and I just wanted to put on this play Bent. It was my favourite play. It was one of the most influential plays ever written for me. And I spoke to the great Tom Earhart at Casarotti Ramsey, the agency. I remember I telephoned him at the age of 21, 22, and went, I'm Andrew Keates. I haven't done anything, but I'm at the Landor Theatre and I want to put on a production of Bent. And this wonderful, wonderful voice came back to me and went, well, doesn't everybody? And I said, do you think there's any chance I could get the rights to it? He said, well, you can write me an email, but I'm not holding out on anything. Anyway, so I sent this email off, didn't hear anything. And I remember I was living in Clapham, I think, Clapham or Stockwell. And I was very, very hungover. And I was in my kitchen trying to make a cup of tea. My phone went, and I answered it. And I just said, hi, it's Martin Sherman. And for me, it was my hero. It was my absolute, it was my Mozart, for me, the most important playwright in my life. And I immediately sort of tried to clear my hangover, and we chatted on the phone. And then we went to Joe Allen for dinner, I think a week or two later. We chatted about the play. And lo and behold, I then put it on, and thanks to that, and thanks to Martin's trust in me, I would then go on to do lots of other Martin's plays, and it's quite. I don't know if anyone can see that. It is such an influential play. Funny enough, had a tattoo done the other day, which is the pink triangle, which was, if anyone can see that, which is what the play covers, the symbol that was given to gay men in the concentration camps, such as Dachau, where Bent is kept. So yes, and Martin, funny enough, I tried to call Martin the other day. He is an extremely important man in my life. Cool. Next question. Where are my go-to places to find new projects? That sofa, and sometimes my bed, I get sent all sorts of things. I try and read them. I get sent a lot. But I always think to myself, look me up, find out the kind of stuff that I do, and find out if I'm going to be interested in it. If it's I get sent so much stuff which is just actors sending out, quite understandably, casting the net like a salesman, sending out stuff that they want made. And I just think, do you know what I do? So there's that. Quite often I'll go. I have an enormous library of plays that I want to do, which I'm sitting on, waiting for an artistic director to phone me and say, "What do you want to do?" And then I'll pitch, maybe 5 of the 50 odd plays that I think are relevant for that year. One of the most important things an actor is in control of in an audition, from Scott. A performance, actually. It's interesting. Nerves in an actor tend to give us a heightened self and anxiety, and there's a strange thing that I noticed, especially in drama school things, which is the like me vibe is the only way to describe it. And actors might relate to this when they were younger. You come in, oh, hello, oh, I'm a bit of a mess, oh, I'm a bit late, oh, and you get all this sort of, and you just think, stop performing, just talk to me, just calm down, don't do the like me thing, oh, God, where's my bag, oh, and you think, you're not in a carry-on film, you're a professional coming into an audition. I want to see that you've got empathy and skill, and that you're likable, and that we're gonna, and that you're up for taking notes. I see quite often in auditions actors pretending to listen, like, yeah, no, that's a really good point. And then they do their speech or whatever they've prepared, and they do it exactly the same way. And I think it's just engaging listening and thoughtfulness, and being able to take risks with a piece, rather than it being too, the performance is often more the actor coming in the audition than necessarily the character they're presenting. And I'm always looking for the meat in the sandwich, not all the shit that goes with it. Sorry, another swear word. Tell me about how you got to do Ben and relationship plays. I've done that. What it's meant for my career and company? The play was very important. But to be honest with you, I'm someone who might do maybe 3 or 5 sort of pieces a year in a good year. I'm really select. I turn a lot down. Working with Cynthia Erivo, for example, on Dessa Rose, Stevie Webb, and As Is. Whether it be Chinglish at the Park Theatre, the British East Asian piece, to the recent production of Dark Sublime with Sophie Ward, Marina Sirtis, Jacqueline King. Bent was important because some of the then theatre critics, when we had them, great people like Mark Shenton, who's somebody I still like very much. The theatre critics, once they put you and said you're young and exciting, people were interested. I think what was tricky is I didn't really have a network at the time to get me into the bigger theatres, because I was young, and I was very fringe based, and I made a big name in a very small, on a small scene. And I'll be honest with you, I'm still waiting for that sort of breakout. Yes, I've had small West End productions, but at things like Trafalgar Studios or a Theatre Under the Arches, there are certain places where I have done big stuff. But really, my aspiration is always to do things like Bent, things like Chinglish, and whatever, pieces that have a heart to them. And on top of that, also comedy. I love doing comedy, without wanting to sound too. We're not very good as British people saying what we're good at, but I'm very good at directing comedy. So yeah, I enjoy doing that a lot as well. Who is the greatest actors you've worked with? David Byrne of New Diorama, probably one of the most greatest powerhouses in London as a theatre. David, I was about to answer Judith Paris before I read your second thing. David Byrne's question was, who is the greatest actress you've worked with, and do you think you'll work with Dame Judith Paris? Yes, I'll absolutely work with Dame Judith Paris on anything. I want to do Hamlet with Judith Paris as Hamlet. I would do anything with Judith Paris. Judith Paris is a great, wonderful friend of mine. She's a fabulous actor, and fans of Doctor Who, of which I'm an enormous classic Doctor Who fan, will know her for playing Eldrad in The Hand of Fear, and we've done many things together. So yes, I'll work with Judith Paris any day. David Byrne. Wonderful story about Bent. Good. This is good. How do you think aspiring LGBTQ+ directors, me, can ensure their work is inspiring and representative of their community without shoehorning it? I hope that makes some kind of sense. Honestly, it's the writer. I know that sounds like a cop-out answer, but A Doll's House is a great play about feminism without it being a play about feminism. I think it's about how true and honest we are to telling a great story. You know, I love Bent because it's a fantastic love story that happens to be between two men. When I did As Is, which was the first AIDS play, I did two productions of As Is before discovering I was HIV positive whilst doing a play about AIDS in the 80s. Um, it's it's not about shoehorning it. I think it's about crafting a story, taking stuff from our lives, other people's lives that we've seen, and how that influences what you write. You know, when a straight playwright sits down to write a play, they don't think about how they shoehorn their straight life. They just write a play. So if you're a director slash writer or whatever, you know, just write the play. Just write it. Because at the moment, if you haven't written it, you haven't got anything. So better to write something and get feedback about how it can be improved. And Jesus, there's enough people who will give you feedback about how a play can be better. But just write it and be true to yourself, to thine own. You know that awful over-the-top quote. And above all else, to thine own self be true. You know, Polonius only says that, you know, as an example of phrases that we put out which are, you know, over the top. The real clue is know thyself, and if you know thyself, and you have an insight into this mad world, and then share that. That would be my response, Monty. Have I missed any questions on Instagram? Sorry, Instagram, you've been getting a lot of my side profile. How did I start out in theatre? I started out in theatre because I was fat, gay, lonely, didn't have many friends, and so I found myself in my own self-isolation, and a curiosity with the world, and trying to understand my place in it. And from there came reading and music and arts and expression. That's how I came into it. And then other than that, the typical route, as a lot of people did, amateur dramatics and, you know, setting up theatre companies, singing, trying to dance, all that stuff as a kid. And then through college, refining that my love and passion was not really being on stage, it was the rehearsal room, because the idea of doing a show 8 times a week fills me with utter dread. Approaching theatres or directors with your plays. I would say most theatres now have a literary department, although of course we know that is often the place where some scripts go to die. Just sending them out, I'm afraid. I think also getting involved in like things like, there's some great scratch nights that go about. You know, I think finding opportunities to meet people within an appropriate environment for them to see if your energies connect and whether you as an artist work, I think that's important. You can always send a play to a director, but, you know, just don't be disheartened if we don't get back to you. Only because we've also got lives, you know. And it's interesting because someone like me is quite accessible because I put myself out there, so I get a lot. But I'm just one bloke living in a flat with his cat. Personally, I would like to see some of the bigger guys in the industry step up a bit. You know, the King's Head has always been excellent when it comes to presenting, you know, new pieces, and the Finborough and lots of other great places. You know, it is. I personally, I think it's a real shame that there does still seem to be a big old barrier with some theatres, and it's actually some regional theatres. People talk about the need to support regional theatre. I'd love to support regional theatre if I could get an interview. You know? Right, I think that's pretty much it. I'll just do a couple more questions before I end this, because I'm probably pretty much out of time. Has anyone got any burning questions they want to ask me before I disappear? I'm getting lots of love hearts. That's very kind. Thank you for love hearts. That's lovely. Oh, what's that one? Is that it? I think that's pretty much it. Okay, folks. Well, I'm going to sign off. If any of that of my ramblings were useful, I'm really, really pleased. One thing I have noticed, the King's Head Theatre I know needs to raise over £100,000, and that will be giving that team sleepless nights. Please consider chucking a fiver their way. I think if you go to their website, King's Head Theatre, you'll find the donate link. You know, it's an extraordinary theatre with a heritage, you know, dating back to people like Dan Crawford, Martin Sherman, who I mentioned earlier, certainly had Cracks, which was put on there, which is a great play of his. it's a fabulous theatre. I'm yet to work there, point out, but it's a fabulous theatre. I've had great nights, and no doubt you guys here will be audience members. If you haven't done so already, chuck them a quid, chuck them a fiver, chuck them 50 quid, chuck them 500 quid. They've got £100,000 to keep going. And I think London without the King's Head Theatre is a much sadder place than with it. And it's been exemplary under Adam Spreadley-Mayor's artistic direction. So give them support. If you want to follow me, which if ever there was a half an hour advert or a reason not to, it's probably this stream. You can follow me on Twitter at Andrew Keates, and Keates is Keates. I'm also on Instagram, that is at Mr. Andrew Keates. And what I really recommend you do, in fact, it'd be great if you can all do this. I promise you, your lives will be better from today. If you go to Twitter is probably the best place. Go to at Show People UK, or on iTunes, search for the Show People podcast with Andrew Keates. That is on every podcasting platform. That's the podcast I mentioned at the beginning of this live stream. I interview, some very, very recognisable names and faces. We talk about their lives, their careers, what they're doing to survive, and more importantly, this season, our fourth season. I mean, we're an award-winning podcast of 4 years now. The current season, I've changed the format, which is specifically about advice and interviews with professionals, all about how to get through the coronavirus pandemic. I'm about to release an episode which is all about universal credit and tax credits and the self-employed grant. It's a really useful information service, and there's some fantastic people I've interviewed on there. Anna Jane Casey, Peter Polycarpo, Stephen Mear, you name it, Paul Taylor Mills, you name them, they've probably been on the show. So the Show People podcast with Andrew Keates, check it out. Sling a fiver Adam and the team's way, and as ever, it's a real privilege to spend some time with you. See you later. Bye-bye. Right. How do I turn this off?